welcome to everybody. It's great to see you. It's great to see so many people here today. I would like to go to the next step and introduce our panel. We're really glad to have Jono Niles and Oliver Bolton with us. Jono has led several major global environmental initiatives, including the Tropical Forest Group and the Carbon Institute. Jono also founded the Climate Community and Biodiversity Alliance, which is really the global standard for high-quality forest and climate offset project used on millions of hectares. For his work, he received the Mulago Award and was called one of the planet's most promising people to deliver bigger, better, and faster conservation and climate solutions. Quite something. Jono today is leading efforts at Salesforce on natural climate solutions, and again, there's quite a bit happening there. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Super. And Oliver Bolton is a serial climate tech entrepreneur and CEO of Earthly, a platform backed by Google that helps over 380 businesses remove carbon, restore nature, and support the communities most impacted by climate change. He previously launched Europe's first B Corp drinks company, Waterbomb, and co-founded the UK's leading subscription nutrition platform, Vital. In 2017, he was the recipient of the Virgin Voom Award from Sir Richard Branson, which included a £2 million prize support package. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Super.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Looking really forward to the discussion.
Really looking forward. And then I have to say, we did absolutely also invite a number of female speakers, and it is unfortunate none of them could join us. We are very aware that we do not aim to have just us white men talking on a panel. Sometimes it just really doesn't work out. We are sorry about this. Anyways, with this, I would like to go into a bit of a framing of why are we here and what are the big questions that we are faced with. So many of you here are working in the carbon markets, are working in the space of regenerative agriculture / nature-based solutions. And so just a few words on this. As we all know, agriculture, which is the topic that Climate Farmers is working on, the aspect of regenerative agriculture, is really a central player to each of the planetary boundaries which have already been crossed. Today is Earth Overshoot Day, so this is really a very timely discussion we're having here. At the same time, we have the potential to make a giant positive impact on not only climate, but also a number of the other areas. So if the global soil organic carbon content were to increase by 4 per mil, 0.4% annually, all anthropogenic climate relevant carbon emissions would be fully offset, is sort of the starting point of the 4 per mil initiative. And the reason we need this, as we all know, is we need to go beyond trying to reduce our emissions. We absolutely first need to reduce our emissions to as close to zero as possible. But then the next step is to go beyond that and reverse the growing trend of CO2 and move beyond to what is called drawdown. That is removing more emissions than are in the atmosphere, than we're adding to the atmosphere right now. What we have with agriculture is that we're not only talking, and the same goes for other nature-based solutions, is that we're not only looking at CO2, but we're really looking at a number of different larger trends that sort of agriculture plays into. And really it's about food security, it's about biodiversity, it's really about how we as a society act with nature. And this makes this discussion often so complicated, because it's already very complicated to look at CO2 itself. But then if we look even more into the complex workings of nature, so to say, and of society, it becomes increasingly more complex. What we have, though, is a situation where we can't really continue as we have been doing it. We just have to expect that things will not be normal anymore. Rain events are becoming more and more extreme, more and more irregular. We have more and more severe and prolonged drought. And this is on the one hand, the weather situation, but on the other hand, for agriculture, we also have the economic and political changes. So a lot of our agriculture system currently depends on external inputs in the form of fertilizers, which are produced from fossil fuel. And on the one hand, we have a dependence on politically inconsistent partners, as we have seen now with Russia. On the other hand, we also know that the prices are going to rise. So we really know that the current system as it is won't be able to sustain us into the future. And we have the potential with regenerative agriculture to replace a lot of it. Because we don't only look at capturing carbon, but we also have aspects such as building biodiversity, reversing erosion, and improving the economic resilience of farms, besides sort of the effect on reducing emissions and actually capturing carbon. But, and this is the sort of the important point, is regenerative agriculture right now misses essential infrastructure. It's really at the center of a lot of discussion in the climate space, but we don't yet have the infrastructure for making it work. And this is why we're working on this question with climate farmers. And one of the reasons why we are here today, there's a lot of interest in regenerative agriculture, there's a lot of interest in carbon markets, but unless we build the infrastructure and build a really good understanding of how we can actually make use of carbon markets for scaling regenerative agriculture, we're not going to be able to make use of this wonderful solution. And so we're working on sort of high quality carbon certificate solutions, which we provide not only for ourselves, so we don't only provide for our farmers, but also for partners that are interested in this. And we're working together with Earthly on this, that are one of the reselling platforms for that. One of the reasons why we look at regenerative agriculture and why we think this is so interesting is, again, we have a number of different benefits, right? Like, we're not only talking about carbon, we're talking about the primary productivity, the fertility of soils, water purification and regulation, biodiversity, cycling and provision of nutrients. Sort of, this is really this holistic approach. And what we're looking at is not only to have a transparent, science-based, and sort of compliant carbon methodology, but really one that also takes into account the whole ecosystem, and basically getting towards what we would call a regeneration methodology. Now, getting to the end, what we are all working on is getting transition finance to a system that is more resilient. So what we're talking about, and this is really important, is transitioning to a more resilient system rather than subsidizing an existing system. There's a lot of attempts to basically say, okay, well, we're running out of money with agriculture. We need to provide farmers with more financing. And yes, we absolutely do, but we need to help them in the process transition to a system that actually has a future. And so this is one point that we really want to make sure of. And of course, as we all know, the carbon markets is still sort of a very Wild West space. And what we want to talk about is, how do we make the best use of carbon markets? How do we use them responsibly so we still have access to them tomorrow and the days after? And we can use the financing for really important work in regeneration and restoration. This much as introduction. And now I would really like to move over to our wonderful panel with John and Oliver. And really looking forward to hearing from you. Welcome again. And so I would like to get started sort of at the core of the question, right? When we're talking about corporate involvement in carbon markets and in nature-based solutions, what we are all seeing is that more and more corporates announce that they have a climate strategy, which, you know, sounds really exciting. And I would like to get your opinion on sort of, I'm starting this on in a slightly sort of with a provocative question, but, you know, is this just a nice thing that they're doing? Is this sort of just a okay, cool, like a nice CSR thing? Or why do you think this interest is growing so much? Why would companies invest a significant amount of money into climate. And Jono, you're working with Salesforce and you're leading efforts there, and Salesforce is really a front runner in this space. What do you think about this?
Yeah, good morning again. Thanks for having me, Ivo, and definitely hello, everybody. Excited to hear more diverse voices at the end of the panel too in our Q&A. So thanks for raising that. I think it's an incredibly exciting time. We have the rules from Paris, and we're probably not going to get a whole lot more. It's a very soft bottom-up treaty. So and national governments and state governments, they're going to continue to do their things, and NGOs are going to continue to innovate. But I think the biggest delta for the next couple of years is definitely corporate sustainability initiatives. And I can't speak to every corporation, whether it's like a window dressing CSR, but I can at least speak a little bit about Salesforce. You know, sustainability is part of our DNA. It's actually one of our core values. Our CEO and a lot of our executive leadership have really championed net zero work, being really transparent about our emissions and our emission reduction strategies, and really publishing those and getting them out there, and then setting a science-based target and moving as fast as we can towards an aggressive science-based target, not just a science-based target. We also, our superpower is software. So we have a lot of tools that we help other companies measure their emissions, and we'll be launching a platform in October to help also source really high quality, transparent carbon credits for once you realize what your residual emissions are. I guess just a couple other things, and then I'll hand it back to you. But I think the most important thing for us is obviously respect the mitigation hierarchy, be really honest about where we are in our journey and what we can do better. We think it's really important to work through partnerships. So we've stood up a couple different partnerships with a lot of great partners, including the Trillium Tree Initiative. When humans first started really expanding, there were about 6 trillion trees on Earth. Now there's about 3 trillion. So we just thought it would be a great idea, apart from carbon markets or integrated with carbon markets. Let's see if we can get kind of a grassroots initiative to put another 1 trillion trees back in the ground. When it comes to carbon finance, and Salesforce is actually net zero for all of our residual emissions across scope 1, 2, and 3. So I see the question there from Ian, like, once we've done as much as we can to mitigate, what is a high quality carbon credit? For us, we really feel nature-based solutions are a major tool for us, because we're not just facing a climate crisis. We have economic crises, we have racial justice and equity crises, we have biodiversity crises, we have an agricultural crisis if we don't start turning things around. So by working in the land sector, it's almost a little messier. Like if you just captured methane in a landfill where you never would have put a methane capture place, that's like very additional. There's a lot of very additional interventions that can be done in the land sector space. It's just a little bit, you just have to be a little bit more careful when you look at things like additionality and carbon accounting. Every hectare, every year is different from any other hectare, any other year. But the co-benefits that you can achieve if you do it right and you invest in high quality projects you can have a lot of win-win-wins come together. So again, our criteria, we're working on refining our criteria all the time, but probably one of our most important one is the impact on livelihoods and uplifting local communities and Indigenous people. So that's a lot of where our key criteria, of course, co-benefits in biodiversity, really strong additionality, really transparent and clear and conservative carbon accounting. But hopefully that gets things started, but really looking forward to hearing from others. And we're also learning along the way. So I'm sure people here can give us better advice as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think we've already touched on a lot of the topics that we're going to be looking at. Just a reflection there, like if we look at sort of different corporates that are getting more and more into this space, like we're working with a lot of leading actors in the agri-food space, and for us it has been very impressive in very short amount of time to see the change of mindset there in the last few years. There has been a huge recognition by almost every large corporation in the space that on the one hand, not only to reduce their own carbon footprint, but also to build climate resilience in the supply chain, right? Like, which of course makes a lot of sense if you're food producing corporate, that you also want to prevent, let's say, supply chain breakdown. Oliver, you're the CEO of Earthly, and your company helps other companies develop their climate strategy, right? And what changes have you seen in the conversation over the last few years, maybe even the last few months, sort of given the interesting weather that we've been having? And how do you see that companies which don't directly suffer from climatic change approach the question of climate risk? Is that something that they're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, there's a recognition that, all companies are ultimately affected by climate change, even if not indirectly. And I think the reality is there's many different types of risks. Even if they aren't exposed to, say, physical risks, they may face, transition and market risks, so changes to consumer demand and changes in policy and legislation relating to a low carbon economy. And we always advise our clients it's worth kind of mapping out these risks. Even if it's not super detailed, intensive, it's just good to know, what they are. And we're seeing the direction, is towards transparency. So more companies are being required to report on climate risk, and now we're seeing this focus on nature impacts and dependencies with the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures. So having this sort of understanding early on will really mean that companies are better positioned to succeed in the future. And we sort of see a future by 2030 where all companies are aware of the risks and ultimately kind of embedding impact into the heart of their company.
Yeah, so it's really sort of more than buying carbon credits, get that nice label of climate neutral if you want to use it, but it's really also making sure that there still is an economy in the future, and there's still business to be made, right?
Absolutely. I think also a big trend we're seeing now is more companies are coming to us looking to integrate kind of investments into nature-based projects into their business models and become regenerative and have a net positive impact on the planet. So kind of decoupling from offsetting a footprint. And so that's really exciting to kind of see, those sort of types of companies coming forward. And, I think also adding that, there's demand for quality, more businesses are aware of the risks of supporting nature-based projects that later are deemed to have issues or potentially fail in the future. So it's great to see that people want to invest into the right projects. And we developed a scoring system that looks at carbon, biodiversity, and social impacts. So we can really kind of have a holistic view on a nature-based project and help our clients de-risk their nature investments.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe to go more on the question sort of nature-based solutions. John, next question goes to you. The 2020 World Economic Forum held in Davos announced the creation of the 1 trillion tree campaign that you've already described a bit, and Salesforce is very connected to that. And again, sort of asking it sort of in a slightly provocative way, would you say, follow-up question afterwards, would you say that participating in the 1 trillion tree campaign, which is basically contributing to tree conservation and afforestation, is the objective for a corporate? Like we have quite a few sustainability managers in the audience, and so if you would talk to somebody getting you into this space, and maybe a company that is beginning to set up their sustainability climate strategy, what would you say to them on sort of being?
Yeah, at Salesforce, I think there's two ways we think about trees and nature and climate. One is on the high quality, very verification, and are deemed credible. We think you have to do everything. You have to mobilize your employees. You have to use your whatever superpowers your company has. You have to use your government affairs people. You have to use your contracting. everything needs to be pointing towards supporting climate solutions. And I think carbon credits can be very difficult for people to get their head around. You're avoiding an invisible gas that's already part of our atmosphere and our natural biospheric cycling. One thing, I was a bit skeptical of the Trillium Trees Initiative, quite honestly, when I first heard about it. What's awesome about it, though, is it's in addition to your carbon neutral or your net zero journey. And it's something that employees and everyone, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, every country and state and province can get behind. It's really designed to mobilize new resources to get great trees planted, grown, conserved, regenerated through agroforestry, through whatever is appropriate, with the right people in the right way, for the right reasons. So we've been really lucky to work with dozens of partners around the world doing incredible pro-poor initiatives in agriculture, most of them agroforestry initiatives. A lot of the work we do in the States, the Department of the U.S. Department of Agriculture just has run out of money to plant trees after all of our fires because they're putting all their money into fires. So we've been able to support a lot of great community-led initiatives doing post-fire restoration, but we're also working in Zambia, Tanzania, on really some of the poorest, most marginalized soils and some of the communities there, helping them do regenerative agriculture and agroforestry. And the goal is never trees per se. That's a metric that we use. It's actually the impacts on lives, on soil, on ecosystem services. Those are the things that we truly care about, even though we often hold ourselves accountable to, like, we've said we would restore or grow 100 million trees, and we're trying to accelerate that and beat that and knock it out of the park and then go way past that.
I think it's a great point. Like, there's really nobody has a good argument against trees, right? So this is really, there's no reason not to like planting trees.
Yeah, I mean, if someone doesn't like trees, let's hear from them right now and let's have a conversation. Yes.
Right. And then I think Esther put this in the chat before, sort of this idea of do your best and offset the rest. And there is this whole question, like, that we, for example, as project developers in this market have, where we very, very carefully create projects, create carbon certificates, highest quality criteria that we can possibly make work. And then the question is sort of, wait, who are we selling this to? And are we selling this to actors that are using this, right? This is sort of one of the criticism. Are we using this to actors that are basically just continuing with what they've been doing, but then they just buy carbon certificates? And so a question that comes up a lot is, the idea is really to reduce everything that can be reduced, and in almost all industries we're going to have a residue that we just can't really reduce anymore, and those need to be offset, right? And not really the other ones. And there's sort of this open question of, how do we know that we have reached the point that where we only have unavoidables left? And to my understanding, there isn't really one standard to this. But I mean, both of your companies are helping so to get to that point, right? Like, to reduce as much as is possible. And I would just like to hear from both of you. Maybe Oliver, you can start on how you do this, and how you can help companies understand which emissions are actually avoidable, and which ones are not, and then need to be offset.
Yeah, no, sure. I'd be happy to chat about that. So for SMEs, we have an automated carbon analytics system, which is sector specific and includes reductions, sort of suggestions and advice. And then for larger corporates, we work with specific consultants who have more detailed experience and who can carry out things like life cycle assessments, for products, for example. And I think worth mentioning, we do have red lines about the types of companies we work with. So we don't work with oil and gas businesses. One of the initiatives that we're working on is we're aggregating the most common and effective reduction initiatives by sector and creating a community of practice and shared learnings where we can hero those businesses that are already going above and beyond, and we can actually share kind of best practice without the need for necessarily working with a consultant as well. And I think, the reality is we're also, we're still figuring out how to do scope 3 emissions. And the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, recently released their claims code of practice, which details what kind of claims can be made when it comes to emissions and recognizing achievements. And so that included the enterprise-wide claims, which represents achievements at enterprise level as companies progress towards their long-term net zero commitment. And then brand, product, and service level claims that represent achievement across the full value chain of a specific brand, for example, a line of products or services. So it's great to see developments in this space too.
Thank you. Yeah, and so also probably worth underlining the fact that it's just things like scope 3 emissions. It's just really difficult to assess, and I think we're all sort of working on the actual systems behind it. John, how do you think about this?
Say that again, Ivo. What was the question?
Just sort of curious on the question of unavoidables and how to help companies. I mean, I understand that Salesforce is also helping companies in emission accounting and understanding what can be avoided, which I think we all agree needs to really be the first step to avoid everything that can be avoided, and then look at the carbon markets. How could a sustainability manager know which emissions are avoidable and which aren't? And I'm just curious, how does Salesforce help in that process?
Got it. Okay. Well, I mean, it's going to be unique to every company, but the first thing is, take stock as best you can, scope 1, 2, 3. Even though we don't have perfect guidance on scope 3, the majority of our emissions are actually upstream and downstream. So we've done our best to figure out what those are and where they come from. We've also started an initiative that might be useful for others, is when we have new suppliers come on, we actually have introduced a new thing called a sustainability exhibit for suppliers to Salesforce. Since most of our emissions are scope 3, it's a process where we ask new suppliers or existing suppliers to actually estimate their scope 1, 2, 3 and show us a plan to reduce it, and also come up with high quality offsets for the unabatables. So that's a tool that we're really proud of and we're rolling out, and it's a nice way to kind of turn what's a CSR issue into a financial issue. It's part of the contracting process. I think the key thing is really to publicly state where your emissions are, where they're coming from, and then what you're doing very specifically and where you are on that road. The transparency is the most important thing. Companies, of course, can take the easy route and just offset. And I think since this is not really a compliance market, the best that we can ask companies to do is be very transparent about their emissions, what they're doing to abate. So really seeing detailed plans. If your top 3 sectors are data centers and employee travel, you should have published very specific plans about how you're going to reduce your emissions from data centers and employee travel. And we should hold every company accountable to that. I think there's also a big spectrum in terms of companies wanting to do more. So I think we're trying to build some skills and partnerships and kind of not 101 courses, but like 202. How do you come up with a specific plan to reduce emissions in your key emission categories, and then be transparent about offsetting with high quality what's left. There is a really cool alliance. I'll put it in the chat, but it's called the Business Alliance to Scale Climate Solutions. This is a partnership with a whole bunch of companies and NGOs, but it's a place to come to learn how to do emission reductions in your company, how to tackle big problems like the task force and sort of the code of practices. And that's also a great place. So I'll drop that in. It's a great place for sustainability managers to kind of learn from one another and try to do better.
Yeah, I think this is so important because it is extremely complex to do, and sort of to create this space for learning and for sort of as a community of practice. I think it's going to be, let's say, very relevant for us as a society, because there's really a lot of responsibility with these companies and with these actors. I think there's also, like, I really like the point that you made on the importance of transparency, right? Like, because we all know that in the space of climate, it's very hard to get everything right. But what we can do is we can be transparent about it, right? Like we can communicate how much we did get right and how much also where we're not quite there yet and where we're in the process. And I think this is going to be it's an interesting shift also in behavior, right? Like towards more and more transparency over time. Maybe to move one step further from, because we talk about carbon markets, right? And this is sort of the established metric for a lot of good reasons on the one hand, but on the other hand, like with climate farmers, we work with the regeneration of ecosystems through agriculture, and then supporting farmers in receiving funding for the transition to regenerative systems. And we get these sort of funds from the carbon markets. And the experience that we make is that our way of thinking about ecosystems is often simplified, so coming from accounting and finance-based systems, right? Where we say, okay, well, we have a CO2 problem. So then, somebody takes CO2 out of the atmosphere. So we pay for CO2 and, then sort of it works. And what we find that in practice is often leads to sort of perverse incentives in nature-based solutions, for example, right? Where we get monoculture of trees, right? Like, okay, this tree captures a lot of carbon, so we plant a lot of that tree, is sort of the straightforward thinking. And same sort of in agriculture, we have sort of more the short-term solutions. And what we see is that, the importance to sort of look at the regeneration of ecosystems that then have carbon as an outcome of it, right? Rather than looking at carbon first. I'm just curious, Oliver, how do you advise corporates to set up their, because you specifically work with nature-based solutions, right? Set up their nature-based solution strategy to actually create long-term sustainable value?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is we're mapping out our marketplace of nature-based projects to align with Griscom, who's a respected, renowned scientist of the nature space, who indicates there's a 10 gigaton annual opportunity for nature-based solutions. And so we are mapping out our portfolio to basically align with those different types of nature-based solutions that can contribute to that 10 gigatons. And so a large part, the 4 gigaton, is around changing existing management of land, so things like regenerative agriculture. So we want to make sure that we're kind of providing representation to perhaps underrepresented ecosystems like peatlands, grasslands, and also making sure we have the right representation for those ecosystems that are going to make the biggest difference. And part of what we look at is the screening, the project screening tool that I mentioned, that has a holistic view looking beyond carbon, but also biodiversity and social impacts from projects. And the biodiversity and social elements are both key to ensuring long-term sustainability and the resilience of those projects. So we really want to de-risk our clients' investments by making sure that the ecosystems they invest in survive and thrive with our changing weather that we have to expect in the future. And we also try and align projects with companies' values as well. So for example, we recently had a healthcare company that came to us and they said, look, we really want to find nature-based projects that over-index in healthcare benefits. So we were able to kind of sort of match make them to create a much more authentic kind of long-term relationship. And as I touched on earlier, we're really encouraging businesses to go beyond net zero, to become regenerative, and once they've tackled the reduction and offsetting their footprint, to look at integrating these nature investments into their business model, so they can have a net positive impact on the world. And I think what's also really interesting to note is it's obviously the right thing to do, but we're seeing a strong commercial return on investment into nature. So whether that's increased sales, whether that's customer acquisition retention, whether that's employee acquisition retention. And so, I think if we can really make businesses aware of the kind of the commercial benefits too, then we can use that as a lever to really, fast track investment into nature, for mainstream businesses.
Yeah, great point. There's sort of goes beyond just the sort of CO2 value, both for the project itself, but also for the corporate buying. What are your thoughts on this, John?
Yeah. First of all, I think Oliver's point is spot on. Like companies, a lot of the progressive companies out there are doing their best to figure out what their most aggressive net zero strategy is. And I think a lot of companies, including our own, are really asking ourselves, how can we be nature positive? How can we credibly be nature positive? I don't mean be nature positive for marketing reasons. So first of all, anyone on this call who has ideas about what nature positive is for a company, please reach out and let us know. We're very much just starting some new work. We have a new vice president, Tim Christofferson, who came over from the UN, and he's really leading the efforts at Salesforce to ask ourselves, what would a nature positive strategy look like? We're very much on a listening tour. We've also spun up a couple exciting initiatives that some people here might want to know about. One is a $100 million climate justice and ecosystem restoration fund. We're also supporting a lot of ecopreneurs, trying to figure out how we can put a lot of our employee enthusiasm and some of our technology, as well as sometimes philanthropy or carbon credits, behind really promising scalable solutions that are out there, especially in regenerative agriculture and pro-poor livelihoods, often around land. So we're asking ourselves what that is. Oliver, would love to get your thoughts, but also anyone here on the panel. I'm sure there's some great folks who could give us some of their best ideas for what a truly nature positive company would look like. But we want to go that way, and we're kind of in a listening mode right now.
Wonderful. I would actually like to take that invitation. Oliver, what are your thoughts on this? And I would also like to invite everybody listening maybe to put some ideas, also questions in the chat on this.
Yeah, it's an incredibly fascinating area. And, looking at the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, the way that they're even defining what is your nature impact as a business, it's not straightforward and simple. But, I think that the reality is we can make very sensible assumptions on a specific nature footprint in a business. And again, if we're going above and beyond, and we're not just looking to kind of hit net zero, then, we can get to a place where actually we can be pretty certain that we are going above and beyond, and we are balancing out those the negative externalities linked to a business that are in relation to nature. So, John, I would love a separate conversation to do a deep dive, into Salesforce and to make some specific recommendations to you.
Wonderful. So there's already new meetings being planned. John, you look like you.
Well, I saw a question from, I think it's Uti. Hi, Uti. The question about as we approach what nature positive looks like, that can be obviously carbon credits, it can be philanthropy, it can be all these other levers. Government affairs should be involved. They should be saying we want to be regulated. We want strong carbon markets. We want fair carbon markets. We want nature to be integrated into that. It should be finance partners within a company. But I think Uti's question is, for us, extraordinarily important for how we think about nature positive, which is it's people first. So when we look at sourcing credits or our philanthropic investments, one of the most important questions we ask, and this is like a decision point for us, show us how the carbon finance or the philanthropy impacts local communities, who's controlling the funds, what percent, and not just telling us, but we want evidence. So I'll just give you a couple examples. Last year, as we were, making a pretty substantial investment in carbon credits in a very difficult market. It was very much a seller's market heading into COP26, and a lot of new companies are announcing strategies, which is awesome. So it's putting tons of, getting the price up to carbon. It's headed in the right direction. It's not there yet. But we were faced with a couple different projects. And I think we were down to kind of our final three. And I finally just went to each group and I was like, hey, can we see your books? Can we see where the money's going? Because you've told us that you give most of the money to local communities or different initiatives, and we can understand how it gets distributed from those groups a little bit. And the company that we ended up supporting, the carbon company and the carbon project that we ended up supporting, was very transparent about the books. They were able to show us not audited books, but they were very clearly project finance, kind of like segregated accounts. And sure enough, they had told us that 90% of the funds went to 3 local organizations and that they only took 10%. Only one of the groups out there that we worked with was willing to be very transparent about their finances, and that's the project we supported. We've basically started walking away from any carbon credit or philanthropy that's not very transparent about those funds. We also ask a lot of questions about eviction or displacement of livelihoods. We also try to ask a lot of questions, not just about generally the people in a project area, but like the most vulnerable. So we try to see how people who are typically marginalized in different communities where projects are happening are being brought into the conversation. And finally, I'll just say one of our criteria is how early and how sincere that engagement was in a project development life cycle. So hopefully that, Uti, gives you a little bit of color into the way we think about it. And again, if we can do better, please let us know, or if you have ideas on how we can do better.
Well, thank you very much. Great answer. Oliver, I don't know, did you see the question? Would you like to answer to that as well?
I didn't see the question. No, sorry. Do you mind?
Uti asked, and I think same question also goes to us. I would like to learn more about benefit sharing mechanism with farming communities, local stakeholders partaking in carbon credits. How does Climate Farmers think about best practices for benefit sharing, or what sort of practices does Oliver recommend to his clients, or how does Jono think about fair and equitable practices? So I think basically, how do you recommend clients work with the question of benefit sharing with farming communities or local stakeholders?
I think the first point I think to make is it varies dependent on the type of project and the type of nature-based solution. But ultimately, as Jono said, it's critical for making sure the flow of funds goes to the local communities and to the right people is critical for the long-term success of any nature-based project. So it's a complex question and there's no exact answer, but it's something, all of the points, Jono, that you went through just now, we factor into the social pillar of our scoring system, and they're all incredibly important.
Yeah. So in our case, basically what we look at is long-term regeneration, right? This is what we're trying to optimize for. So we're trying to optimize for regeneration on basically 3 areas: on the ecological side, on the economic side, and on the social side. So farmers are honestly in a very, very difficult situation, often sort of with the back to the wall, or let's say it was a couple of years ago, it was with the back to the wall, and now it's further to the back. On all of these levels, right? Like the kind of agriculture that we've incentivized and regulated farmers, at least in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, into is not the kind of agriculture that people have signed up for originally, right? Like this was not why people got into agriculture. So there's the question of why are we as a farming community involved in this, and do we really care about this, and does this really fulfill us? And we neglect that part, but this is really going to be the part of why, or whether or not people are going to be stewards of the land, right? Like whether they actually engage and are able to care. Then you have, of course, the aspect of economic regeneration, right? Like, so currently the economic system for agriculture just doesn't work in any way. It's built on yield, and yield does not mean profit. And so we're trying to optimize yield for us as a society, which is very, very fair, because we're trying to ensure food security. But the farmer shouldn't actually optimize for yield. The farmer should optimize for profit for their farm. And so there's this whole question around designing farm businesses towards profitability, and often so the answer to this is reduce input costs, improve resilience, and improve pricing that you get for your products by higher quality products, and finally the ecological regeneration, right? But they need to go hand in hand. And so what we're looking at is sort of yes, carbon markets, yes, payments from carbon markets, but what for, right? Like we want these payments to go towards long-term regeneration, and not sort of, okay, well, carbon is the thing. Okay, what do I need to do to get carbon into the ground? This. okay, check. Because what we see is that this leads to this carbon being lost very quickly, right? We had a great discussion here on another episode with Clara Rowe of Restore, and she made that point that really sort of, if you optimize for carbon, you're going to lose that carbon. Only if you look at restoration, ecosystem restoration, are you going to have sort of permanent carbon. But carbon is always sort of a co-benefit of successful regeneration, and we need to pay for that. So Uji, to your question, this is sort of the way we approach this. Is first of all, look at long-term regeneration of the ecosystem, and going even beyond sort of the ecological aspect of it. Amazing. I love this discussion and love the participation from everybody. Thank you very much. I just quickly go back to our script, and then we go back to the question. Thank you very much for posting them. There's one question, because we discuss a lot sort of carbon credits, permanence in sort of all of these questions around carbon certification. And I think it is clear that when we're talking about nature-based solutions, there's always a risk for permanence, right? Like there are no permanent ecosystems, and therefore no permanent carbon capture in ecosystems. At the same time, we have all chosen to focus very strongly on nature-based solutions. I'm curious about sort of to hear from both of you. Why nature-based solutions? Why do you believe in them? Why have you chosen to focus mostly on them? Maybe Oliver, could you start?
Yeah, so look, as John mentioned earlier, we have many crises, and it's not just a climate crisis. And the two big ones we focus on are climate and biodiversity, and of course they're interlinked. And as John also said, it's carbon's hard to get your head around, but biodiversity is even more so. But the really kind of interesting thing is 90% of the conversation is around carbon and climate, and so there's a real underrepresentation to the biodiversity crisis. And so we were attracted to nature-based solutions because they tackle climate, they tackle biodiversity, and they support those people at the forefront of climate change. And I think the stat that we sometimes talk about is, if as a world population we get to net zero by say 2050, if we haven't fixed the biodiversity crisis, then we're still toast. So investment in nature is needed now, and in the run up to 2030 for it to have the biggest impacts on warming in the second half of the century. And we also need to protect critical stores of carbon in places like the Amazon to avoid crossing into thresholds and into more sort of severe climate change. And adaptation through nature-based solutions is needed to support those, as I said, on the front line of climate change, facing increasingly extreme weather. And as this climate change already baked into our system, investment into nature-based solutions such as restoring mangroves can provide these additional adaptation benefits alongside mitigation. And nature-based solutions that they also build not just natural resilience through ecosystem restoration, but they can also build community resilience by supporting social infrastructure, helping lift people out of poverty, improving people's ability to manage climate impacts as well. So those are all the reasons why we're dedicated to nature-based.
That's sort of taking into account that, again, we live in a complex world and things are very connected, and we can't isolate one problem and solve this and ignore the others, right? Yeah. John, how's that for you? Like, I mean, you've been working in this field for a long time. You must have very good reason for this.
I have, I guess, I'm for a carbon credit, I would be very durable. I've been in 20 years doing this, but look, it's not about a CO2 level. Like, ecosystems have to be conserved. We have to stop losing 10 million hectares of rainforest every year. We have to stop degrading our soils. So in addition, we then need to put the car in reverse and start restoring all the ones that we've already screwed up. And if you allow some theoretical optimum that you could have a permanent or only 100-year solution, then we're never going to have the planet that we need. We have to be able to be bold and take risks and be honest that ecosystems that we are supporting through climate finance or philanthropy are all at risk right now. So it would be like cutting our nose off to spite our face to stop working in ecosystems. It's absolutely essential. They do so much more than their CO2 impact. They modulate soil health, soil moisture, livelihood, so people don't go and attack other ecosystems, or not attack, but survive by using other ecosystems. I don't mean to use such pointed language, but we have to do everything. And if we only think that you can have a permanent solution, then we will fail the biggest opportunities over the next couple of years, which Oliver has pointed out and you've pointed out, everyone on this call knows. We've got a 10 gigaton per year opportunity. We need to face this like climate finance has to go up 100x. We have to get way more ecopreneurs supported. We have to get all the smaller groups that we all are trying to uplift, give them more resources, more access to finance. And yeah, we need to think about longevity. We should ask hard questions about projects. Are they taking climate risks into account? Are they planting for the future that we know is coming? But at the end of the day, we still need to just put more resources on the ground.
I think great point. I think we all agree on that. Like, well, there's a lot of potential in nature-based solutions. At the same time, nobody's saying that technical solutions are not a good idea, right? Like, definitely do all of them, right? Like, it's sort of, I think this is a really important point, not to discuss about is it this or that? Is this the right solution or that the right solution? It's yes and this other thing. So I think this is a really, really great point. Maybe one question on, again, like if I'm coming into this space new as a sustainability manager, setting up the climate strategy, all of this is very complex, and really understanding it in detail is a big challenge. So how do I make sure that I'm partnering with reputable providers for carbon removals? What do you recommend looking at? Is it really sort of these are the basic standards that are known? Is it sort of what do you say sort of beyond this? Oliver, I mean, you're really recommending these things. I'm curious, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, look, on the carbon scoring, our system looks at all the usual obvious things like additionality, carbon accounting methodologies, permanence, leakage, and we use data from multiple sources to build a holistic view of a project, but also check that they have transparent monitoring and reporting and verification systems so we can track impact over time. And it's really interesting, just even looking at Vera, from our analysis, we see a huge range of quality from Vera certified projects. And, we see it as a great responsibility that our clients are entrusting us with their investments into nature, and we want to maximize the impact that these nature investments will have. We typically recommend our customers to have invest a percent of their portfolio focused on innovation. So not necessarily focused on carbon credits, but so scaling up high quality projects that are increasing ecosystem and community resilience and building up supply projects that could have a large potential to support climate mitigation in the future. For example, things like seaweed farming.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also thinking on the discussion we had earlier on sort of how do we include other nature metrics in there, biodiversity, water, community. And I think Ian made a great point in the chat, Ian Gold, on sort of, there's a lot of discussion about metrics on how to accurately measure the changes. And I think anybody who has been in this space for a while has been discussing this for a long time. And I think Ian makes a great point about sort of the quest for perfection is stopping huge amount of activities that need to start today. And at the same time, I also agree that we need to maintain quality in this space, right? Like we need to make sure that that things are not just arbitrary. Like, oh yeah, we have done something, but it's all more or less the same. And what we have found a lot in this work is there probably is no perfect carbon credit. but there is transparency about the process, right? Like there isn't not really accurate measurement of soil carbon. It's not a thing. But there is transparency about you know, how high is our level of confidence about the numbers. And so I sort of would like to repeat Ian's point on don't let perfection be the enemy of the good, but at the same time also, so the point of, and be transparent about it, right? Like, okay, this is how we have quantified, let's say, our nature impact, however we call it, and this is exactly our methodology, and here it is open source, and here you can follow it, just so we are sure that, you know, we actually mean the same things about this. So I think this whole thing with methodologies in the carbon markets is to make sure that we are able to follow up, right, and that we actually know the sources and the ideas of where things come from. I think this is also something that we see a lot. Is basically, you know, the first point is there a methodology behind your carbon credits? Are they transparently stored on a registry? Are they, you know, can you follow up on those as well, right? Now, John, one more question here. We speak with a lot of corporate sustainability managers for their interest in our Carbon Plus certificate program from regenerative agriculture, and you know, there's all of the given complexity. Let's say, you know, our sustainability manager has you know, worked on a continuous reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, has chosen a varied portfolio of climate solutions that suit the company. Now, I think a question is, how do we communicate about it, right? So on the one hand, we know that we want to have a lot of transparency there. We want to also not only talk about carbon, but nature-based solutions. What are your thoughts on the usage of net zero as a term? So we have this with the last COP, COP26. We had the adoption of Article 6, and with that, you know, there's some changes to this. There's a whole recording of a previous previous conversation, so I won't go into the details here. So feel free to watch this on our YouTube channel. But how do you see the question of compensation versus contribution?
Yeah, I think in terms of communicating corporate climate action, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is the more transparency, we've already said it, the better. I think a lot of companies are taking science-based targets, which is it's a great process. It's a great institution, and it's got some very good elements. One of the problem that's lacking, though, is it's difficult to make any claims in the short term. So if you're a company and you do everything right, you've got a sustainability value, you've got all your employees working on it, you're transparently reporting your emissions, scope 1, 2, 3, you're doing the best you can in 3, you've got plans to reduce all your key sectors, you're trying to find the highest quality offsets, you're supplementing that with philanthropy. You should be able to say something. You should say something to inspire others, to tell your shareholders, to tell your employees what you're doing. And I don't think the global community has kind of landed on what that is. What we've been doing to communicate is we just say we're net zero, we have zero residual emissions, right? Our residual emissions, the one that we cannot abate, we're netting those out with high quality offsets, plus we're doing additional philanthropy on top of that. So I think that's how we approach the communication issue. And again, if you think we should be doing something different, we'd love to hear from you. But we're trying our best to just communicate everything that we know about our emission portfolio and what we're doing. So we list all the tree projects we support. We have a very detailed stakeholder impact report that goes through a lot of the initiatives that we're supporting. And so everything's out there for people to criticize for us or to compliment or to join us. But that's our approach, is just doing the best we can and communicating it really clearly and simply, ideally.
I think that is such an important point, because again, it's difficult to do, but the important thing, and I think you make a great point, is like, here, this is what we do. We believe that we've done the best, but if you have a suggestion of what we can do even better, wonderful, then, let's work on this together. I think this is a really important approach, and really sort of what we need as a society, right? Like, we need to work on this with all of our energy, and sort of full transparency. I'm going to go into the closing of this panel, and then we have a few follow-up questions from the participants. And if you still have questions, then feel free to still add them. But I'm just curious, sort of, from this conversation, I really appreciate talking with both of you. You taking the time. Both of you really approach the nature-based solutions both from a perspective of scale, right? Like, we've been talking about 1 trillion trees, while bearing in mind the context specificity, right? Like the community aspects, and making sure that we implement the right kind of projects. And we have, Jono, you said this before, we have a 10 gigaton opportunity, really, right? Like, we're in an unprecedented crisis, but we're also in an unprecedented opportunity to turn this around and not only solve for climate, but also for biodiversity, if we do this right. So in closing this part of the panel, I'd like to ask both of you just to say a few words about the potential transformation that you see possible if we collectively got this right. And maybe, Oliver, would you like to start? Still on mute.
I think, I would love to kick it off. I think a future where we can truly value nature would be an amazing tool to support the global south, pricing in the value, not just of carbon, but other benefits to biodiversity and people. And, we often reference, the economic value of a mangrove tree is $100, yet it costs around 10, 15 cents to plant. So there's a huge kind of mismatch here. And I see a future where companies are competing not just on price and quality, but on the positive impact they're having towards our planet. And I would love to see us almost turning consumption into a force for good, where we're able to leverage these investments to not only support net zero targets, but to begin transforming supply chains and reducing other issues like pollution and deforestation and food and water supply. And I get really excited thinking about a future world where humanity is living in harmony with nature, and about the potential mental and physical health benefits that future generations might have in that world.
I love this one. The idea of companies competing on who can have the biggest positive impact, rather than on showing that, oh, I'm not doing too much harm. I think that's really inspiring. So, how's that for you?
Yeah, I agree with everything Oliver said. I mean, one of the things that's most exciting, a lot of people on this call here today I think what climate finance has done is spurred massive innovation, and we're well short of where we need to be. But the level of excitement around climate finance, smart climate finance, especially nature-based solutions, especially regenerative agriculture work that climate farmers and a whole bunch of others are doing, it can be very inspiring to see all the new ideas and a lot of new methodologies, and the standards are really being forced to try and scale up and do better. So that gives me a lot of hope. And what I don't sleep well about is just, we need 1,000 times more of all of you. We should clone everyone on this call in a safe manner that is not going to lead to any mutations or escapes of invasive any's of views. But yeah, we're still a small community, and we need to figure out how to infuse all of our finance partners, all of the difficult sectors, all the sectors like oil and gas, and find out how we can just infiltrate them with great people to work on obviously the mitigation hierarchy, reducing the emissions, holding people accountable, but also sometimes fighting bad things is not an easy message, but building good things is. And that's where regenerative agriculture and nature-based solutions can just, I think, be like a almost like a accelerant. We can get more and more people into this, the more they can see real tangible impacts on people's lives or on nature if they can get their hands dirty. So we're headed in sort of the right direction with a lot of people on this phone call. I'd love to hear more about what you all do and think. What I'd love to hear from others is how can we 1000x the number of people on these calls and the level of finance and new technologies in some of the hardest places to get to.
I think that's a great question. Thank you very much. And there is so much energy coming into the climate space, right? So I think a connected question for me is also, how do we help people? How do you help all of this talent coming into the climate space choose sort of the questions that really matter, right? So how do we sort of create a map of, look, here are all the problems that still need solving versus the ones that maybe are solved already or that are, solved to a certain degree already. There's still a few questions we have, so I would like to get into those. Mateusz, you had a question earlier on the exchange between the private sector and the regulator. Could you maybe expand on that a bit?
Yeah, with pleasure. So thank you for giving me the floor, Ivo, and thank you for a fascinating discussion, both on chat and in a spoken way. John, you've been sharing at some point during the conversation today, hey, we as an industry want regulation because we are doing all those wonderful things, but there's a bunch of things that need to happen regulatory-wise in order for all of this to make sense. I am working with climate farmers on regulatory and policy affairs. We share that view. We also think regulation needs to come to the sector with farmer centricity, which is one of our key values. And feel free to answer short, but I'm super curious to hear more. What do you mean? What do you see when you say, we need regulation coming to that sector? How do you see it? What do you see it? What is the timeline you are seeing? Thank you.
Yeah, again, this goes to a company needs to throw every resource they have at this problem. For our company, we're really proud of our government affairs team, people who work all around the world, speaking to government officials, regulators at the state, international, local level. And we've built like a climate pillar into our government affairs work. So we get to spend a lot of time answering their questions and educating them about climate change and solutions. And I'm going to paraphrase what our message is, but it's a serious problem. We want to be regulated. We want there to be carbon markets so that we can find lower costs emission reduction so we can do more. And we think nature has to be a critical part of that. So we try to be very proactive in specific legislative or policy arenas. But I guess I would throw the question back to you, Mateusz, is like, governments have failed so far. Like the Paris Agreement is a very great consensus process. It's the largest source of consensus in human history. If you look at all the COP decisions year in and year out, which is amazing, it's how humans should work together. It's incredibly soft. It leaves it to countries to decide what they're going to do. And we just haven't seen countries flipping over with regulations to control themselves. So we do want that, we need that. But I'm nervous whether if we wait for regulation, we're going to be waiting a long time. So would love to hear your thoughts or others about what are the most important levers we can push, companies can push to move regulations and policies that are going to force this rather than leave it to a voluntary initiative, essentially.
If I can
answer shortly, and then we can go to one more question.
In 30 seconds, 2 points. What we think, maybe not all of the answer is, but definitely two key components of the answer is enhancing agency of the farmers. One of the things we are doing as climate farmers is building a community of farmers, and we see more and more that those solutions have to come from the bottom up, but have to be linked back to the policy at the highest levels and everywhere in between. And this is precisely what we are doing with the farming community, or the community of the farmers that we are stewarding right now and developing in the next stages. And then second point, I've mentioned that already, having those kind of communication channels with politicians, with the regulatory bodies, and literally building a set of bridges between bubbles that exist already. They either are not aware of each other, even departments within the same or different ministries at the country level, or they are aware, but for some reason they cannot speak with each other because maybe this is not part of the job descriptions of the people we are speaking with. So those are two major things: building bridges and supporting intentional bottom-up action with a systemic perspective.
I think really interesting point. There's also the question of, again, sort of how do we address very complex ecosystem problems with, you know, people being in silos, right? Which is in the end, which we have in a lot of at least in ministries or on the EU level. So we have specific people in charge of carbon or agriculture or biodiversity, and not necessarily cooperating. So I think it's also a really important point. How do we have more cooperation in this space? Sort of related question that came up in the chat. Thank you, Natasha. We're talking about nature-based solutions. Why don't we also address the solutions to better price ecosystem services so as to generate positive returns in that space that is going beyond simply mitigating CO2? And I think that's a really interesting question. We have a price on CO2, right? Like we have a carbon market. We don't have a market for biodiversity, water, community benefits, which, you know, of course, has a lot of reasons also in the quantification. But do you see ways in which we can better price such ecosystem services, in which we can create a demand for such ecosystem or contributions to ecosystem services? Either one of you, whoever feels called.
I mean, yeah, I think understanding and acknowledging those projects that have, you know, amazing co-benefits and are doing things in the right way and helping deliver a premium price for doing things the right way is really important. And we've spent a long time recently looking at, you know, rather than stacking the co-benefits into a premium carbon credit, maybe actually there's more of an opportunity kind of decoupling the co-benefits into a biodiversity credit, water credit, carbon credit. And actually maybe that's a better solution to make sure that maximum, you know, value is given to those projects doing things the right way. And, you know, in the UK, we have for construction projects over a certain size, there's already regulation around the biodiversity net gain credits, and so it's a really fascinating market. And you know, one can even see a future potentially where, you know, biodiversity credits could even be a larger market than carbon credits potentially.
Fascinating, thank you.
I'd love to hear other people's thoughts. I guess just a counterpoint, I think markets are great if we get them right. Carbon is relatively easy because it's such a fungible, understandable thing. You know, a ton of CO2 is effectively a ton of CO2 when it comes to radiative forcing in the atmosphere. So I think markets for biodiversity and ecosystem services and livelihoods are great, but I would actually go back to David Bartlett's point almost in the chat, which is, I think it needs to be a cultural shift that we value these things as well. Like, we should support markets for these things, but really we need a new generation of people who see livelihoods and ecosystem services as a right and start demanding it and working towards that. So yes to markets, but also I worry about just relying on markets. We really need to think about changing norms around some of these harder, more complicated things that we all care about.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is really sort of a question that we have a lot as well with climate farmers on. Completely agree with you, right? Like, in the end, what we want is a society that values the contributions to ecosystem services that, you know, different actors, farmers among them, do. And so if we always talk about carbon and biodiversity, but the example that I like to use is rainwater infiltration, right? Like, if we have sudden extreme rain, the only thing that keeps a village or city from being flooded is agricultural and forest soil, and that is worth a lot of money if it comes down to it, and so we should be paying for it, just as one example. And so if the question is, and you know, in Europe, the most obvious place to do that would be through the common agricultural policy. But then, in order to develop the mechanisms, so you know, this could come from us as society / through government subsidies. How do we develop those mechanisms if not in the private market? So I'm so very much with you. And so if it often seems to me sort of this cat that is chasing its own tail. Silva is sorry, no, not Silva. Marika is asking Oliver whether you already have an approach to how to decouple carbon, biodiversity, water, and how to measure. And I guess maybe the question comes back to Ian's point earlier. Perfection is the enemy of activity.
Yeah, I think so we're working on this at the moment, and specifically talking to the BSI on a pass with a view to it becoming an ISO standard. And this is also connected to, in general, how we structure different nature-based solutions across different ecosystems, building on the IUCN's global framework for nature-based solutions. So it's something that we are looking at the moment. We're really keen to progress things, but you know, to do it with the right people, to make sure we're not repeating work, you know, that's already been done, and but can definitely see the value of having some kind of public methodology, especially if we can get it to an internationally recognized sort of ISO standard as well. The British Standards Institute is the BSI.
Thank you so much. And I think this is also maybe, I see that there's a lot of people working on different areas of this, and maybe sort of a side effect of this is people connecting to each other, because this is where we just really need work, right? Like we as a group of people need to come together and progress on many of these questions. So I hope you're exchanging contact details in the private chats. If not, you still have a couple of minutes. I think with this, I would like to say thank you so much, John, Oliver. Thank you everybody for joining, for the active discussion in the chat. Really appreciated that conversation, because it really felt more like a conversation with all of you. Really looking forward to the next one. Again, the recording is going to be on YouTube in the next couple of days. You're going to receive an email with the link to it. There's going to be a blog post with the main findings about it. And the next event in this series is going to happen in between 4 and 8 weeks from now. Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you so much, Oliver.